Hello everyone. This is the 16th part of the story, Abe the Wizard. Chapter 65, Guessing the Price. Did you know how much did my magic weapon sold for at Edmund's boutique shop? Abel asked as he looked at the somewhat dumbly self-righteous prince. Does it cost more 10,000 gold coins? Prince Wyatt was unaware of the actual price of these weapons. However, he quickly realized that maybe he was underestimating the price. He proceeded to say in a strong voice, the auction price was inflated. As the prince of the duchy, I will pay 10,000 gold coins for your magic weapon, which was more than enough. Prince Wyatt thought that, although Abel was a blacksmith master, he was still too young and he had been scared from what he had said. Looking at Abel's silent expression, the prince thought that Abel had accepted his offer. By that point Thorin, the dwarf master, could not tolerate this anymore. A deep voice came from his long beard. Are you threatening a blacksmith from the Union? Or do the Duchy of Carmel thinks that the masters of the blacksmith union are not worthy of being respected? Only then did Prince Wyatt discover Thorin, the dwarf master. Since he was already very short, it was even harder to spot him at first glance when he was being covered by Abel. No, Master Thorin, that's not what I meant. Prince Wyatt promptly explained. Prince Wyatt didn't have a lot of money on him at the moment. Since the king's health was deteriorating, the prince's times as a royal was coming to an end. This was why recently he was spending a lot of time in the Duchy of Carmel, crazily trying to spend as many gold coins as possible. So his life would be easier in the future. To protect his valuables, he must recruit elites. With Abel's magic weapons being any knight's dream equipment, it would for sure to persuade any high-level knights to serve him. Wyatt's desperation made the situation seem like a death struggle before he lost his title as the prince. Not only so, but this process also seemed to make him lose his mind completely. Master Abel's work is worth 20,000 gold coins, but you want to force him to sell it to you by force for 10,000 gold coins. You then threaten him with your identity as the duchy prince. Do you know how angry the Union would be if I told them what you did? Thorin's voice became higher and higher, ultimately ending in a growling voice. It was no longer Abel's business since he was a part of the Union. Something like what the prince had done would be in defiance of the Union as a whole, and they would not tolerate such behavior. The roar of Thorin, the dwarf master, startled all the nobles at the banquet. When they realized what Prince Wyatt had done, there were signs of anger revealing in their faces. Who was Abel? He was Harvest City's pride, youngest master blacksmith as well as a successful lord that was looked up to by many. Viscount Dickens was also furious at the prince's action. It was him that had brought Prince Wyatt to attend this dinner party, but what Wyatt did made him lose his prestigious reputation, which was the most important thing to nobles. Master Thorin, I didn't know the real price of the magic weapon, I was only skeptical about the price and I didn't mean to offend Master Abel. Prince Wyatt said with a paled face as things got out of hand. If King Astor found out that Wyatt had offended the blacksmith union, the first thing he would have done was to kick his son out of the palace. This meant that he would not be given even the title of noble. He would have become an ordinary citizen, and no matter what, he would not accept this. Master Abel, how do you want to go with this? Said Master Thorin. The blacksmith union doesn't want to bring you any trouble. Since they were at Harry's castle, he wanted to know how Abel will approach this situation before they make a move. Master Thorin, today is Uncle Marshall's birthday, and since Prince Wyatt wants to purchase a weapon without knowing the actual value, I will take out a magic sword I had newly forged. I hope you can examine the price, so the prince can purchase it. The two new magic sword Abel had forged were both made with the 120 skills base, and the runes were written with intermediate rune ink, which had made magic power more stable. The dwarf master Thorin must know the actual value of this sword. Since Abel didn't want to deepen their tensions, he decided to just sell off one of these big swords to the prince. As you wish, Master Abel. Thorin, the dwarf master, thought that Abel did not want to cause any more trouble for the Union, so he tried to resolve the conflict. He could not help but admire this young blacksmith. Abel then waved at his steward, Lindsay, to collect a magic sword from his operations room. After a while, Lindsay came out with a big sword. "Master Thorin, this is my latest work. Please examine it and let me know your thoughts." Abel gestured to Lindsay to give the magic sword to Thorin, the dwarf master. The nobles on the side were all very curious to see this magic sword, a magic sword that worth 20,000 gold coins. It was even higher than the price of a castle, which made all the nobles watching the whole event extremely excited. Thorin, the dwarf master, took the magic sword and inspected closely at its body and flicked his finger on it. With the flick of his finger, a blue light flashed and his fingers were immediately covered with frost. Thorin moved his fingers and quickly shook the frost off his fingers. He then turned and looked at Abel curiously. "Your achievements was astounding, it was even more shocking considering your age. This sword was even better than the ones forged by the masters of my people, although it was made with a normal iron, its quality had hugely surpassed 100 skills." The nobles all around listened quietly to Thorin's explanation of the weapon. This was an extremely rare opportunity to hear a dwarf master evaluating a weapon. Thorin, the dwarf master, bowed slightly towards Abel and said, "Master Abel, I am glad you found a new method to produce stronger steel. I will forward a request to the Union to record this achievement in the Blacksmith Union Hall of Honor." The Hall of Honor was the blacksmith's holy temple in the Holy Continent, where records of all blacksmiths' achievements in improving their forging techniques have been passed down by countless people and recited by bards on the continent. "I was already thinking of talking to you about this after dinner." Abel smiled back. Thorin, the dwarf master, with a look of delight in his face, saluted. "It was my pleasure to discuss with you." As Thorin picked up the magic sword again and said to the steward, "Please bring me a piece of log." Shortly after, Lindsay sent for his servant to bring a 1-meter-long log to lay before Thorin, the dwarf master. Thorin, the dwarf master, took the magic sword and slashed directly onto the log with mild strength. The sword immediately sank a depth of 1 cm and there was frost surrounding the log. "Your use of the rune ink was rather unique as the effects lasted much longer than any ordinary ink. In comparison to my kind of magic swords, yours was much more powerful with formidable power. May I know your ink recipe?" Abel had some difficulty in answering this question as he had combined the inks through the Horadric Cube. It did not have any formula or recipe. "I'm sorry to make things difficult for you, Master Abel, I've gotten too curious." Thorin, the dwarf master, touched his beard in embarrassment. Usually, it was an unreasonable request for another master for their recipe, but he couldn't help himself after he saw how powerful magic swords' effects were. Master Thorin instantly regretted these actions. Prince Wyatt's face was becoming gloomy, and the words of Thorin made him felt as if he was targeting him. Thorin continued to praise the magic weapon to raise the value of the weapon, which ultimately would cost him more gold coins. Viscount Dickens then interrupted the conversation with a smile and asked, "How much is this great magical sword worth, Master Thorin?" Thorin suddenly remembered that he had yet to assess the value of this magic sword. He quickly made some mental calculations and said, Thorin Oakenshield values this sword at 50,000 gold coins." When Thorin, the dwarf master, finished his evaluation, all of the royals at the castle all looked at the magic sword with a look of envy, jealousy, and longing in their eyes. Viscount Dickens picked up the magic sword with great curiosity. He then waved the sword for a few times and turned around to ask Abel, "Master Abel, how many of these swords have you made this time? May I have one?" Chapter 66, Birthday Present. "Viscount Dickens, if you want it, I can give you the one I have." Before Abel could finish his sentence, Prince Wyatt's face immediately began blushing. Prince Wyatt did not have that many gold coins on him that evening. Though his identity was still a royal, he wasn't at the point where he could enjoy the magic gold card. If he had the inheritance of Duchy of Carmel, then he would have been eligible for it. As of right now, his identity as a prince, as well as the instability of his position, meant that he could become an ordinary noble anytime. "I won't take away your personal one, Abel. If you don't have any magic sword right now, I can wait until your next forge. Viscount Dickens hated to be called Viscount. Everyone in Harvest City knew about this. Since Prince Wyatt's affected his name, it had made him very unhappy. However, he could sense that the prince might not have enough money. It didn't matter if he bought an extra weapon, as long as he could embarrass the prince right now. Viscount Dickens then took out his magic gold card from his pocket and said, "I can pay in advance, Master Abel. 2 of the same magic weapons have already been forged at this time, and since the ruler of the city needs it, you can have the other one." Abel turned to Lindsay and asked him to bring out the other magical weapon. Abel's workshop was not open to anyone. Only Lindsay and the Lord of Marshall were able to enter and leave the operations room. Now that Lindsay realized the values of the weapons, he decided to add a lookout post in the doors of the operations room. Lindsay moved swiftly. Within minutes, a large magic sword was soon in the hands of Viscount Dickens. Viscount Dickens waved the magic sword in his hand twice and happily held the magic gold card in front of Abel. Abel then also took out his magic gold card as he paired it with Dickens' card. Abel's balance then jumped immediately from 1750 to 51750. Abel was very short of gold until now. He had never held so much gold in his hand, but he was still too slow in earning these gold coins considering the 270,000 gold coins were the amount he needed to pay for the potions required for his training. At that moment, everyone was staring at Prince Wyatt. The price of the magic weapon had been set by Master Thorin, and one had already been purchased by Viscount Dickens. Now it was up to the prince, who had no reactions, to make his next move. "Master Abel, may I discuss with you privately?" Prince Wyatt said to Abel in a dried-up tone. "Your Majesty, Prince Wyatt, this way please," Abel said as he pointed towards the guest room. When Abel and Wyatt came back, there was a small smile on both their faces. Abel had a genuine smile while the prince had a slightly bitter smile with his eyes sparkled darkly. Abel immediately raised his awareness as he came back from his discussion. By this time, Abel, who had superior mental strength, was aware of Prince Wyatt's malice. "This magic sword is yours now," as Abel handed the last of the magic sword to Prince Wyatt's hands. This dramatic scene within the banquet of the Hairy Castle gave all of the nobles that were attending a tremendous surprise and shock. First, it was the fact that the ruler of Harvest City, as well as one of the 4 royal princes, was attending. Then they were shocked that one piece of Abel's forgery was able to reach up to 50,000 gold coins. When all the guests had left the castle with satisfaction, Thorin and Bentham were still talking with each other as they were staying over to exchange their forging knowledge. When the guests had all left, the Lord of Marshall immediately asked Abel impatiently, "What did the prince give you in exchange for the magic sword?" The prince exchanged a yard on the 1000th level of Triumph Avenue in Bakong City for the magic sword, Abel replied. "The yard on Triumph Boulevard?" Lord of Marshall's eyes lit up and he laughed. "It's the best place in the entire duchy," he said. "I just wanted to settle it and get it over with, that's why I agreed." Abel was not afraid that Prince Wyatt would trade his cheap yard with him, since that would risk angering the blacksmith union. "Where's my birthday present?" The Lord of Marshall was very jealous of the new magic swords. From Master Thorin's introduction, it was certain that the newly forged magic sword was much more superior than the old magic sword. "Uncle Marshall, how can you not have a birthday present for your birthday? I have already prepared it for you. Let's go and have a look." Abel then led Lord of Marshall to the square, and when Master Bentham saw that Abel was going to show Lord of Marshall's birthday present, he took Master Thorin with him to look around. "That's it." Lord of Marshall looked disappointingly at the carriage in front of him. The 2 fiery bulls were his and Abel's spoils of war. It was the best cart in Harvest City, but it was far from what he had imagined. Abel made a lot of changes to the carriage. Master Bentham spoke from the side. "When he picked me up in this carriage, I noticed it was very stable. Not bad." Lord of Marshall was a little relieved, and though his intermediate knight's body did not mind the stability of the cart. It was still better than a normal carriage, as Abel had taken a lot of effort to modify this carriage. Abel saw Lord of Marshall's face and knew that he was thinking of getting his magic weapon. Abel laughed and said, "Uncle Marshall, come inside the carriage and look." The four of them got into the carriage together. The spacious compartment was not crowded even with 4 people, and there was no problem at all if there were 2 more people. Lord of Marshall looked at the tables on either side and said, "That's a good idea, I can now put fruits on the 2 tables, how convenient." Abel gave Lord of Marshall a scornful look and said, "How could I possibly modify just a little, knowing your interests?" The Lord of Marshall looked indifferent. The greatest happiness in his life was meeting his wife, the greatest fulfillment was guarding the castle that he and his wife built together, and the greatest luck was to have Abel as his adopted son. His little hobby was to show off. With such a son to be fond of, how could he not show off? "This is the controller," Abel said, pointing to the switch near the table. "There are 10 switches. The table on the left regulates the cold air, and the table on the right regulates the heat." "Has it?" Lord of Marshall asked incredulously, touching the switch at the left table. Master Thorin and Master Bentham looked curiously at the 2 cupboards which could regulate the temperature of the carriage, and both were astonished at the apparition of a device that was said to have been used to control the temperature by magic. "The car needs to be moving before you can turn it on. Then you can press the controller to change the temperature," Abel explained. "Enough talking. Let's go for a ride," the Lord of Marshall called impatiently to the driver sitting outside. As the 2 bulls took their steps and began to run, Lord of Marshall and Master Thorin both found that the carriage was much more stable than they had imagined. Since they had all finished the banquet, all 4 of them felt a bit hot. The Lord of Marshall pressed the start button and turned the air conditioner to the coldest mode. Although they could not see how the machine operated. The fan was tied to the wheels of the carriage with a conveyor belt. With the movement of the carriage, the magic metal sheets began to spin, unleashing the ice magic power from the box to the rest of the carriage. "This is incredible." Master Thorin was the first to exclaim. "How did you do that?" Master Bentham asked. "It's a great treat." Lord of Marshall sighed. "It was easy." Abel opened the door under the wooden table on his left to reveal the iron cabinet inside. When the cabinet was opened, all 3 of them were shocked. This. Is this a magic sword?" The Lord of Marshall was certain that it wasn't a magic sword, but it was just with the appearance, other than that there were barely any differences. "Your way of thinking's left me speechless." Abe Master Thorin, looking somewhat dumbly at the 10 iron plates in the cupboard. "It's a waste for the Lord of Marshall to ride in." Master Bentham said with a voice that was filled with envy. "And the one on the right?" the Lord of Marshall asked. "Yes, it was made with some fire magic gems," Abel explained while he opened the cupboard on the right. When the chests were opened on either side, Master Thorin was dumbstruck by Abel's style, while Master Bentham talked softly to the Lord of Marshall about borrowing the cart. Chapter 67, Marshall the Rich. Master Thorin was shocked by Abel's writing. He kneeled down to closely examine the magic metal sheets within the 2 boxes. After a while, he stood up and shook his head in awe. "Master Abel, your love for your stepfather was beyond my imagination. Every single one of these 20 magic metal sheets in here can be taken out and used as a magic weapon. Moreover, they hold the same value as the 2 magic weapons you sold today." After hearing Master Thorin's professional review, the Lord of Marshall's jaw can't help but drop to the ground. He then began to laugh loudly, and asked, "Master Thorin, are you saying this horse carriage which Abel had given me, cost more than 1,000,000 gold coins?" Master Bentham reached out his hand and patted the shoulder of the Lord of Marshall. He then spoke with a ridiculing tone. "Be careful, this thing is expensive. Someone might steal it." The Lord of Marshall arrogantly lifted his head, laughing loudly as he said, "No one would say this if they know the number of weapons I have equipped. So don't even think about taking me down if you are not a commander." Abel couldn't help but shake his head. His uncle Marshall was in show-off mode again. Even in a banquet, the Lord of Marshall did not put down his two big swords. According to his own words, if a knight did have his weapons with him all the time, it would be suicide. Master Bentham and Master Thorin's eyes suddenly began to light up. The two big swords in the Lord's back was too flashy. All these times the two masters kept their manners and avoided asking the Lord about it, but since the topic has been brought up, the masters had become interested. The masters knew that Abel's best weapons were probably either reserved for his personal use, or for his family. Therefore, the two big swords that the Lord of Marshall had always carry around with him must have been Abel's finest of the finest. Let's have a look. What about these weapons that made you so crazy? Due to their many years of friendship, Master Bentham could just ask the Lord of Marshall directly, without caring so much about being polite. Looking at how interested these masters were to his weapons, the Lord of Marshall felt tremendously proud of himself. Although Master Bentham was not a real master, he was still one of the blacksmith elite of Harvest City. On the other hand, Master Thorin was a part of the Blacksmith Union. He was an acclaimed master of the entire Holy Continent. The Lord of Marshall disarmed the two big swords from his back and placed one of them on the table of the carriage. In regards to the other one, he was not willing to let go of his hand. He turned to Abel and said with dissatisfaction, "This ice magic sword isn't even as good as the sheets of metal in the carriage, how can I show it to people?" The masters looked at each other and smiled. Abel said with a choice, "Fine. I'll make a new one for you the next few days, just put up with this one for now." The masters then looked at the magic sword on the table. They mutually told each other that they could have a look first. At last, it was Master Thorin who took out the sword out of the sheath. Master Thorin lightly flicked the blade of the sword with his finger. The strange thing was that this big sword doesn't seem to be too different from those ordinary ones. It doesn't seem to have any special effects, and since the gem in the handle was covered with decorations, Master Thorin felt a bit confused. He turned and asked Abel, "Is this a magic sword?" Of course, this sword would only unleash its power when attacking. Lightly flicking on the blade doesn't count as attacks. Abel honestly explained. "What magical attribute is this sword?" Master Thorin proceeded to ask. "None, it only has the ability to rumble off enemies," said Abel. "No way, that's impossible." Master Thorin was a bit lost for words. He then picked up the sword and said to the Lord of Marshall, "The Lord of Marshall, can you please step off the carriage with me and test out the ability of this sword?" "Of course, Master Thorin," said the Lord of Marshall as he opened the carriage door and jumped off. After everyone had got off the carriage, Master Thorin lifted the magic sword and struck towards the sword of the Lord of Marshall, who was already in defense position. When the swords came to contact, a white light flashed from the magic sword in Master Thorin's hand. Afterward, the Lord of Marshall could not help but get knocked back for 10 steps. Master Thorin still could not believe what he saw. He exchanged sword with the Lord of Marshall, but the result was the same. Master Thorin, who was now holding the magic sword, had been knocked back for 10 steps. "My God, this is a golden weapon. Master Abel, you could produce a golden weapon. Do you know what does this signify?" There were only 2 blacksmiths in the entire nation of dwarfs who could produce a weapon of this level. Master Thorin proceeded to speak with excitement. "You have become the greatest blacksmith of the Holy Continent, or in other words, a perfect master." Abel didn't seem to be too excited by these words from Master Thorin. This was because his goal was no longer to increase his rank as a blacksmith. All he wanted now was to become a wizard. Everything else was pale in comparison. Master Bentham was there to witness each step of Abel's transformation from an amateur to the master he was today. Now, Abel's level had increased once again. He could not help but exclaim, "Abel, your growth has been tremendous. Now, I can only look at you from afar, hoping you can make good use of your gift as a blacksmith." "How much money do these magic weapons?" asked the Lord of Marshall curiously. Interruption: the masters. After Master Thorin heard that the Lord of Marshall was trying to put a price on a golden weapon, he couldn't help but felt a bit angry. However, since he was the stepfather of Abel, and the owner of this golden weapon, the master has no choice but to shook his head and said, it was very hard to calculate the cost of these golden weapons. There were very little records of them being auctioned in history, as most of them were sold privately. However, if I really have to put a price on it, I'll say above 200,000 gold coins. These words made the Lord of Martial's knees felt weak, his spirit was impacted once again. Since when does the price of the things in his castle gain so many zeros? He thought about the castle's income, and his life saving, it doesn't even come close to the price of this sword. However, after he thought about it for a bit, he realized he was actually the owner of this sword, and Abel was his successor. The Lord of Martial's mood was lifted again, he stood up straight, strongly affirming himself. At first, Abel thought about showing Master Thorin the magic big shield he had just made. However, this magic sword he had made long ago had already brought such a shock to Master Thorin. If he kept bringing out more and more magic weapons, it would make him come across as a bit of a show-off. On top of that, Abel also realized he had underestimated the value of these magic weapons, so he decided not to show Master Thorin any more of it. After they returned to the castle, Abel was reminded of the evil intent of Prince Wyatt, so he brought the Lord of Martial to his private operating room within the castle. Abel, what's happening? The Lord of Martial asked in confusion. Uncle Martial, I have a feeling that the situation with Prince Wyatt will not be settled that easily. You have to be careful when you go out, said Abel quietly, expressing his worries. No worries, the big sword in my hand will not be afraid of him, said the Lord of Martial carelessly. He was a survivor of the orc attacks, not just an ordinary knight, his glory was built on the corpses of orcs. Seeing the arrogant look of the Lord of Martial's face, Abel had gotten ever more worried. Therefore, he had taken out the magic big shield he just made and handed it to the Lord of Martial. He said, "Here, take this shield, don't let go of it the next few days." The Lord received the shield with a face full of excitement. Everything his adopted son made was a treasure. Since everything he owned would be under Abel's name in the future, he had never rejected any of Abel's gift. What rank is this shield? Asked the Lord of Martial. According to the words of Master Thorin, this should be a golden level shield, said Abel after he thought for a bit. What's its ability? The Lord of Martial proceeded to ask with care. It can at least absorb the combat chi attack of an elite knight, Abel replied. Then what am I afraid of? Prince Wyatt can come right at me. I have 200,000 gold coins weapons, a 1 million gold coins horse carriage. That kid doesn't even have enough money to buy a 50,000 gold coin weapon, how can he ever compete with me? At that moment, the Lord of Martial seemed to forget how much money he had in his wallet. All these outrageously luxurious equipment had made his self-esteem even higher than Mount Budapest. This marks the end of part 16 of the story, Abe the Wizard. Thank you for listening. Please like the video and hit the subscribe button to listen more. Hit the bell icon to get notified of all the new content uploaded to the channel ASAP.